Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, part 3 of the $500 Pentium G4560 computer build video series, Build Video Time. This video is the assembly of all the parts that I showed in the first video into this computer. There is one very minor change that does not affect anything about this build, and that is I'm using a 500 watt power supply instead of a 430. It's a $5 change. And the only reason I'm using it is because I already put the 430 into a different computer, and so I grabbed a 500. Otherwise, everything you see here is exactly as shown in the build video. The first thing to do, we have our case laid on the side. We need to remove our parts that come with the case. These are our toolless drive trays. If you are using a hard drive, you will use these toolless drive trays to install it. They're very simple. There are pegs on either side. You would simply bend the plastic out, drop the drive in place, it snaps in, no screws. Since we're using a 2.5-inch solid state drive, we'll actually use the screw holes on the bottom using screws that come with the case, and we'll put that right there, but for now, I'll just put that right back. It slides into place. This has all the screws and parts we need to mount everything in the system. Take a look at that. Some zip ties, a bunch of different screws. I'll set this aside, but we will need all of these items. The next thing to do is to untie this. These are the front panel connectors. This is the USB port connector, the HD audio. I'm simply going to set all of this aside. We will use it later. The other item we want to get out of the way for now is this. This is our rear fan exhaust. We're simply going to tuck this in here so it doesn't get in the way of our CPU. The next thing you'll need is your I/O shield. This comes with the motherboard. Each motherboard has its own because it matches the outputs of it. They're all the standard size. It gets inserted right here into the back of the case. I'm going to flip the case up so you can see better. We are now looking at the back of the computer case. This opening right here is where we install it, and it gets installed from the inside of the case. Make sure that your case fan cable's out of the way. Simply bring it up here, line it up with the lip around it, and then push in. There we go, snap. And be careful not to bend it. With the case back on its side, I want you to take note of this mounting post and this mounting post right here. We need to move them. We need to move them to this spot and this spot. And the reason is because we have a micro ATX board. This board is not full length and will not reach those posts. This screw hole and this screw hole are used in these two positions. If you cannot remove these with your fingers, you may have to use pliers because these are on pretty tight. And there we go. Our mounting posts are now in place. Our next step is to take our motherboard and place it on our desk and install our CPU. Now I've taken the CPU and the cooling fan out of the box. The CPU does not have any pins on the bottom. The pins are on the motherboard. So be aware of this when you're installing it. To access the CPU socket, you need to take this lever and bring it down and off to the side, and you lift it up. This then simply comes up. You can then remove the protective cover. Be sure to save this protective cover. If you ever have to send the motherboard back under warranty, you'll need this protective cover to protect the pins. But for now, just set it aside. I now have the CPU in my hands. I'm holding it only by the edges. Don't touch the top, don't touch the bottom. On the bottom, we have our CPU contact pads, and on the socket, we have our pins themselves. What you need to take note is that there is an arrow in one corner of the CPU. It only goes in one way. Furthermore, there are two notches on the CPU, one right here and one right here. And they're going to line up with two notches right here and right here. So you want to make sure that you line the CPU up properly and it gently sets down into the socket. Just like so. You don't push it down, you don't insert it into place, it just rests right there on top. Now, at this point, you're going to close the lid carefully, making sure that these two tabs go on either side of this post on the bottom, because that's what really holds it down. This will take a minor amount of force. You're going to push down on this lever and tuck it under there. The CPU is now secure. It's held on to the sides by these two tabs, and then on the front here, it's not going anywhere. Now, I would love to say, let's install our cooler, but the problem is there's nothing to push against. It needs to be mounted in the system. So I'm going to take the cooler and just set it aside, and now we're going to put the case back on the desk. With our case back on our desk, we can now take the motherboard, and you can see the various ports here. We want to make sure that the video ports and the audio ports go through the slots. Now, you're not going to be able to see it, but take it and put it in at an angle and then tilt it down. This screw hole right here will actually go on this peg. This is not a mounting post as much as it's a mounting pin, and it's going to hold the board in place, nice feature of this case, while we get everything else screwed into place. So we come down, line it up, and I have to look off to the side here to make sure I get everything lined up where it's supposed to be. And there we go. Everything is pushed through the holes. And then I push the board down, and the pin is now sticking through the board. The board is now reasonably secure. It's not going anywhere, but we need to put screws here, 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 and here. This is where magnetic screwdrivers come in very handy, because otherwise you're fighting trying to get the screws on while inside your case. My recommendation, do not tighten all the screws until you have them all in place loosely. I'm just going around the board and I'm just tightening them all. I've got them all in. There's that one. Come up here to the corner, and there's the last one. These do not have to be tightened down really tight, just finger tight. And do not use power tools when working in computers. Use manual screwdrivers. Power tools will put way too much torque on these screws. It is now time to install our CPU cooler and fan. There are 4 holes in the motherboard right here that we are going to install these pegs through. Please note that thermal paste is pre-applied. Don't touch it, because if you do and mess it up, you'll have to reapply it. It does not come with spare paste. You can buy some, but why do that when you already have some? One important point to note is this: where are you going to connect the CPU fan? I want to point out that there is a retention little tab here. You can take this out if you need it, but if you look right here, you'll see this is where our CPU fan header is, and when I put this down, it may well reach without me having to do it. In fact, if I get it close, well, I thought that was going to reach. It's not going to, so we are going to have to take this out of this little tab. There we go. And depending upon your motherboard, you may have to do so. So I am actually going to turn it. This is square. You can actually turn this any direction depending upon where you need your power cable for the fan to go. Once you have it positioned, one thing you want to check are these little twist things. Now, when they're twisted this way, they are unlocked. That is how you release it. You want to twist them this way so that the arrow actually looks like it has a place to turn. The reason is the way you lock it in place is you simply push down on each of the 4 corners. So I'm going to take this and set it down on top of the CPU, lining up the 4 holes. There we go. Once I push it into place, don't move it. Push 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. That's all you have to do. I held down in the center while pushing lock, and each one clicked. Now, I don't know if you'll pick it up on my microphone, but each one made an audible click. This is now secure and it's not going anywhere. You put the screwdriver in here and you turn these to unlock it and release the cooler. I'm now going to plug it in and make sure it's plugged into the CPU socket on the motherboard. And now it's plugged in, and this cable is not going to bother anything. At this point, we're going to take our rear case fan and plug it into one of the case fan sockets on the motherboard. There is one right back here, and so we'll plug that in now. The next thing we're going to install is our solid-state drive. Now, hard drives would work the same way. You would mount it in the tray. We have to screw this in because it's a 2.5-inch drive. And here is our solid-state drive. It is basically a small plastic case with some flash memory and a serial ATA connector in it. I'm going to take one of these trays, it doesn't really matter which one, and I'm going to line the solid-state drive up with the screw holes. Do make sure that the data, actually that's the data and the power cable are faced away from your connectors, because when it goes in, they need to be faced to the back. Now the case comes with the screws for this. They're very small flat screws, so I'm going to put those on now. And here we are screwing the last one into place. These small screws are just provided with the case, and they fit in there just fine. So that is now attached, just like so, and I'm simply going to take it and insert it into the bay. We'll connect that in just a minute. The next thing we need is a serial ATA data cable. Now these are provided with the motherboard, 2 of them. Now this motherboard actually has 6 serial ATA connectors. We're only going to use 1 for our drive, but you have plenty of expansion if you need more. Now one end of the cable is an L shape and one end is a straight shape. We're going to put the L shape on the board and we want to locate serial ATA slot 1. Now it's not critical, it'll actually work almost no matter what you pick, but in this case we want this one. And what we're going to do is put that into place right there, and it clicks and locks into place. Now you could absolutely take this cable and you could just shove it in here somehow, but we want to care about our cable management. We want to make our system look nice. And so actually I am going to run it under here. Take a look at that. There is our cable tucked under there. I'm going to run it down here when we flip the case over, but for now I'm just going to set it right there. It is now time to install our system memory. Now this is very nice memory. This is Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 memory. Now this is 2133. What's linked in the video description below is actually going to be 2400 megahertz RAM. I've had this for a while. This board supports 2400. I'm using 2133. I will probably end up running it at 2400. Corsair makes very good RAM. It's just I happen to have it, but the link in the video description below will be to 2400. Here is one of our 2 sticks of memory. An important point about DDR4. If you look at the golden fingers along the bottom of the RAM, you will notice that it is longer in the center and narrower, shorter on the outside. This is exclusive to DDR4. If it's straight across the bottom, you have DDR3 or older. The notch is also physically in a different spot from DDR2 to 3 to 4, so you cannot physically accidentally install the wrong type of RAM. Most of these boards are all going to be DDR4. Make sure you have the right kind of RAM. When you look at the motherboard, you'll see these tabs on the edge of the RAM, and then you will see as I move them in and out, they just pop out finger pressure just like that. Same as at the top, you need to make sure they're all popped out. When we insert the RAM, they will pop in automatically. That's how you remove the RAM. That actually pops it up from the board. Locate the notch in the board and make sure you have the RAM lined up the right way. Notch to notch, small side on the bottom, large side on the top. System RAM goes straight down and straight up. It does not go in at an angle. It does not tilt like this. It simply goes in straight like that. Use 2 fingers on either end to push down, click, click, and the RAM's installed. Please note, if excessive pressure is required, it's probably turned the wrong way and the notch isn't lined up, or you don't have these tabs open. Make a note of the small slot on either end. That's what I'm inserting the PCB or the printed circuit board into. And there we go. And I'll push in on both ends. 1, 2. Easy as that. Our RAM is now successfully installed. There's nothing to configure with the RAM, it just configures itself. The next thing to install is our power supply. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, this is a 500 watt EVGA. It's the 80 plus white, just like the 430 in the video. It's $5 more. I already put the 430 in something else, so we're putting this here. Fan side down. There is a vent on the bottom of the computer. It will suck fresh air in from the bottom, go through the power supply, and out the back. The reality is, under many circumstances, this fan may not even turn. It depends upon the load and the power supply that you're using, but put that down and it simply goes right here beneath this ledge. And so we place the power supply inside this ledge and we slide it towards the back, just like so. With the power supply roughly in place, we now need to screw it in. 4 screws come with the power supply to screw it into the back of the case. And there we go. I'm tightening each of these screws into the back. I went around and did each of them one at a time. And now our power supply is securely in place. Now we're going to deal with the cables. All I've done is untangle them and lay out what I need. One power cable with the serial ATA connectors is going to go to the other side to drive the solid state drive. These are not. This is another one with serial ATA connectors, and this has Molex connectors, which I'm definitely not using. I'm going to zip tie these up, roll them up, and put them here so they don't get in our way. And now you can see my completed handiwork. I have both of those cables tied together with a larger zip tie tucked away at the bottom. They'll never bother anybody. The next cable we're concerned about is this, the PCI Express power cable. This is going to be for our video card, our RX 470. I'm going to leave that on this side because we'll need it right here. The other two cables are right here, the 24 pin ATX power cable and the CPU power cable. Now these actually go here and here respectively, but I'm not just going to drape them across. That would be ugly. They'll get in the way. That's a bad idea. Instead, I'm going to run them through these cable management slots up this side port right here and then up to the top and plug them in. So these are actually going to get run through the back of the board. What this means is that we need to turn the case over, take the back panel off, and do some cable management on the back. And here we are looking at the back of the computer. Yes, it looks a bit of a mess, but that's because we haven't managed anything yet. This is the serial ATA data cable from the motherboard. Now, this needs to plug here into the solid state drive. But we don't want to just leave the cable like this. We need to tie it off. And what I'm going to do in this case is use one of the small zip ties that came with the case. And I'm going to tie this over gently. I'm not going to pull this too tight. I don't want to damage the cable. And with that tied, I'm simply going to tuck this cable here into this empty drive bay. Now, if you actually had all the drive bays filled, then that wouldn't be a solution. You'd have to do a little bit more management. But honestly, this is going to sit on the desk. That's not going to go anywhere. I'm not worried about it. You could tie it off more, but for now, that's going to be fine. The next cable is the CPU power cable, the 4+4 or 8-pin connector. Now, I've moved it to this hole here because I need a little bit more reach to reach the CPU power connector is actually way up here in the corner of the machine. And so I've brought it through this hole. I'm going to bring it up along here. Now, I'm going to put it through this spot right here, but I don't want it to be loose. These ridges right here are cable management locations. So I'm going to take one of the zip ties that the case comes with, I'm going to run it through this right here, and I'm going to tie it off to hold it into place. And with that tied securely in place, I've added one more right here to make absolutely sure that doesn't go anywhere. That is now nice and secure. The next cable to deal with is the big one, the 24-pin or 20+4-pin ATX power cable. Now, the ATX power cable actually plugs in about here on the motherboard. It can be run along here, but notice that it'd be resting on top of the serial ATA data cable. So I'm actually going to run it under that, just like so. And then I'm going to run it through this hole right here. Okay, quick update. I've changed the cabling a bit on the serial ATA cable. That was a little loose. I said it was fine before, but hey, I'm here. So I've actually tied it off here. It's running along the back, and then it runs down here. That just keeps it from wobbling around the back of the case. The last cable we have to concern ourselves with is the serial ATA power cable, which I will plug in right now, because our solid state drive needs power. Now we're left with a lot of cable here. You have a couple of options, but since I have all these drive bays, I'm simply going to tuck it down into the bottom drive bay. That is never going to bother anything. When I actually put the back of the case on, it's going to hold it there. It's going to stay. The last thing to think about is our front panel connectors, our USB front panel audio, power switch, reset switch, light switch, etc. I don't want them to just be flopping around in this big area here, and I don't really have room to run them here because the cover has to go on, and this is as thick as it'll get. So my only real option is to run them through here. And here I've used a bright green zip tie from my zip tie kit, which is a very handy thing to have. $5 to $10 will buy you hundreds of these cable ties in various sizes. I use them on all my builds. If you're going to be building a computer, $5, I'll link it in the video description below to Amazon. Get yourself a box or package of 200 cable ties, and then you can tie to your heart's content and make a nice organized system. So these front panel connectors, look at this, they're now not going to go anywhere. We've got everything lined up. Now we can put our cover back on and turn the machine over. And here we are with the system turned over. 24-pin ATX connector, front panel connectors, PCI Express power connector still here, and our CPU connector. The CPU connector will connect first. It goes right up here in the corner. I cannot really film its installation without a cameraman or an angle, so I'm going to put it in and you'll see what it looks like. And there is our CPU power cable plugged in with the cable tucked around the top. Now it is time to put the 24-pin ATX connector on. This is the hardest cable to plug in. First of all, it's two pieces, so you got to make sure they're together, and they don't always want to be. So make sure they're together and lined up. Take a look at your motherboard, and you'll see there's a raised ridge on one end. That's where this tab goes. Because it's 24 pins, it often doesn't want to go down. If you just shove and shove, you may break your motherboard. The motherboard is supported here and supported up here. There's nothing under this. If you just push hard enough, you'll just crack your motherboard in half. You may have to rock it back and forth, and you may have to put your finger under the motherboard to support it as you're pushing down. So you're pushing up on the board while you're pushing down on the cable. Our motherboard power cable is now installed. Now I had to get over it and put my hands down, so I can't really film the installation of it inside of a case, but essentially you have to rock it back and forth and put pressure in the middle to make sure that the entire thing is fully on. Make sure that the tab here is clicked down into place. It should not be resting up, and it should not come out when you pull on it. The next things to install are the front panel audio connector, which goes right here, and the front panel USB 3 connector, which goes right here. And there we go, the USB 3 connector is plugged in right here, and the front panel audio connector is plugged in here. I actually ran the front panel audio connector through this little spot here to make sure it's held down. This, unfortunately, is a very stiff cable. I might tie it down, I might not, I haven't decided yet. But because it sticks up so high, it would be very hard to tie it down without bending it completely over, and you don't want to break the motherboard socket. Then you finally have power switch, power LED reset switch, and hard drive activity light to plug into these very small connectors on the motherboard. And if you look right here, you will see the front panel connectors. Now, there's just, again, no way to film it. I realize it's supposed to be a build video. I want to show you everything, but trying to plug these individual pins on that stack next to each other. Now, in the MSI quick installation guide that comes with the motherboard, there is a page in here that shows right there the layout. You've got to look at the pins on the board, match it to the pins on the front panel connectors, and they're different on every machine, on every case. So you just have to plug them all in there as it says right here. Yes, it's a little bit of a challenge and very hard to film, but that's what makes your power switch, reset switch, hard drive activity light, and power LED work on the front of the case. The last thing to install is our graphics card, but before we can put our graphics card in, two things have to happen. Number one, push this tab down. I'm just going to go ahead and mention it right now because when they put the graphics card in, it's going to pop up automatically. That's also how you remove the card, is you push that down to pop the card out. Side note, while we're here, I'm going to mention something else. This motherboard does have an M.2 slot. If instead of messing around with the 2.5-inch solid-state drive, you ever want to put an M.2 solid-state drive, it does support those right here. You certainly have many options to choose from, but that's not here nor there for now. You need to open up the back of the case. I have turned the case on the back again. You can see the power supply on the bottom and the I/O shield right here where we have all of our various connectors. These, you need to remove two of these right here. First, you have to remove this plate. Now, this is going to be different depending upon what your case is. Each case is going to be a bit different. And with the second screw removed, this panel can come off. So if you choose to go with either the Spec 01 case or the 100R, this first panel has to be removed. There's two screws to remove right here, and this is where the back plate for the card comes in, and this is where your video out ports for your video card go. I'm tilting this up now so that you can see two of the plates have been removed. This is where our video card's going to go. And here is our awesome RX 480 graphics card. Here are the golden fingers along the bottom. Take a note of that and line it up with the slot. There's a notch in the slot right here, which is where this goes, and a notch in the back, which actually rests over this back part right here. Now, because of this piece right here on the graphics card, you cannot actually line it up and put it straight down. You'll run into the edge of the case. So you got to come forward a bit towards the front of the case, come down, and as soon as you clear this, then you got to move back before the card hits the motherboard, and then you simply insert it just like, very carefully, just like so, and then push down, and it locks into place. This back tab popped up as soon as I pushed it down. Do make sure that you screw the 2 screws in on this end that you removed before when you took the plates off, and then put the back plate on as well. And there are 2 screws on the back. This card is now very secure and not going anywhere. I'm now screwing the back plate here to fully secure it into place, and there's our last one. And you can see our video out ports from the card are right here. That's very secure. That's not going anywhere. The last item is to hook up our PCI Express power connector to the power on the video card. Now, these are both identical. This is what's called a 6+2 connector. You can push it together to make it an 8-pin connector if you need it. If you buy the MSI Armor OC, or for example the MSI Gaming X RX 470, they use 8-pin connectors. This one and the XFX card use 6-pin. It doesn't make any difference. It simply installs just like that. There's a tab on the end. Make sure you push it in all the way, and then we will zip tie our cable. With our cable securely zip tied, the excess cable is tied off. This is not going anywhere. It's not going to accidentally hit our video card fan. It's not going to move around. Yes, it's kind of sitting here in the air, but unfortunately with where this is positioned, there's nothing you can do about it, but that's fairly secure. As long as you're not moving the machine around too much, you're just fine. Our build is now complete. It's a fairly straightforward, simple build. Motherboard, RAM, CPU, video card, all the cables plugged in, motherboard power, USB 3 ports for the front, data cable for the hard drive or solid state drive, depending on which one you use. There's our SSD, power supply, CPU power connector, front panel connectors, front panel audio connector. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now all we have to do is to put the side panel back on, plug it into power, and use our Windows 10 USB thumb drive to install Windows, which will be in the next video. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section. And as always, check out my video description below. Links to both Amazon and Newegg for all the parts that you see here in this video will be down there. Compare prices between the 2 stores. They both offer great customer service, excellent deals. Buy your items where it makes the most sense for you. You will also find linked down there, just on the chance that this is the first one of these you've seen, the full playlist to this build video series, from parts overview to the background Y vlog to the Windows install, Windows performance, and game performance videos. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.